Hello everyone, this is integration by parts and this is the formula. So let's go ahead and title our notes integration by parts, and the formula is below. So pause this video and get that down. Alright, so now that you've got that down, if you're curious about why this formula is what it is, I'm going to go ahead and post a video, an optional video below this that explains why this formula exists. And long story short, it's essentially taking the product rule, which is the derivative of the first times the second, plus the derivative of the second times the first, and then integrating it and then rearranging it. So if you're curious, you can go ahead and watch that video. All right, so here's our first example, and the goal is to recognize this integral in this form right here. And what we want to do is choose one of the parts to be f of x and one of the parts to be g prime of x. And there's a really simple hint here that helps you identify which one is going to be considered f of x and which one's going to be considered g prime of x. And I'll tell you that in a second. But notice how I'm setting up this chart right here. I'm basically writing f of x and then writing the derivative of it below, and then I'm writing g of x and then g prime of x below. Now going back to that, how do we determine which one's f of x and which one's g prime of x? Well, here's my hint. Choose your f of x to be the function that once you take the derivative over and over again, it will go down to 0. And if you need another hint, you should choose the g prime of x to be a function that is easy to integrate. Now, personally, I believe that choosing f of x is the way to go in terms of what to do first. So, for example, with x and sine x, which one of those, when we take the derivative of it, will get down to 0? Well, that's going to be x. Think about that. What's the derivative of x? It's 1. If I kept taking the derivative of 1, I would get 0. All right, now which one are we going to choose to be g prime of x? Well, we're going to choose the other one, in this case sine of x. And notice how I put it down here, because that's g prime of x. I want g prime of x. Now integrating this, I'm just going to say, I'm going to take a guess and say cosine x. Is that true? Is it true that the derivative of cosine is sine? Actually, it's not true. We're going to have to put a negative here. So I don't know if you feel better with derivatives or integration, but what I would do is check this by saying, is the derivative of negative cosine x sine x? And the answer is yes. All right, so basically when you're going in this direction, you're integrating, and when you're going in this direction, you are taking the derivative. All right, so now we know that we have this right here as my f of x, and this right here is my g prime of x. So my formula states that the integral of f of x g prime of x, which I have written to the left, is going to be equal to f of x times g of x. So right here, I'm going to write f of x times g of x. Well, my f of x is x, and my g of x is a negative cosine x. So I'm going to have a minus here and then cosine x right there. All right, so that was just f of x multiplied by g of x. Now I'm going to do minus the integral, and the next thing I'm going to write down my f prime of x, which is a 1. And then I'm going to write down my g of x, which is a minus cosine x. And in this formula, I've kind of forgotten my dx, but it's not necessarily important. Let's go ahead and simplify this. I get a negative x cosine x. This minus here becomes a plus the integral, that 1 disappears, of cosine x dx. And now all I have to do is integrate cosine, which gives me sine. And I'll drop down my minus x cosine x plus sine x, and then don't forget your plus c. And we are done. So essentially all we've done is take some time to identify our f of x and our g prime of x. And then once we've done that, I like to find my g of x and make sure you take the derivative of your f of x to get there. Once you have this, all 4 of these functions, it's just a matter of taking those 4 functions and plugging it into the formula, and then you will have to integrate at some point. All right, here's our next problem. And the first thing you're going to do is quickly write down f of x equals f prime of x equals g of x equals and g prime of x equals. And again, we've got to choose an f of x and a g prime of x. So we have to choose this thing and this thing, and we have to find it in here. Remember, my f of x has to be the thing that when I take the derivative of it, if I kept taking the derivative, I would get down to 0. So it's going to be 4x in this case. And I'm just going to fill this out now. What's the derivative of 4x? Well, that's going to give me 4. And so now that I have my f of x, I need my g prime of x. And so I'm going to label cosine x as g prime of x. So my g prime of x is cosine x, and then this is going to be a sine x. How come? Well, remember the derivative of sine is cosine. So you can either think of it as integrating from here to here, or double check your answer by taking the derivative from here to there. All right, now we are ready to plug into our formula, specifically the right side of our formula. So my first step is to do f of x times g of x. So that's going to be a 4x times sine x. And then I've got to do my minus, write my integral symbol. And now I need to write down f prime of x times g of x, in which case this is going to be a 4 times a sine x. And if you want to put your dx, that is technically correct. All right, I'm going to drop down my 4x sine x, and now I'm going to integrate a minus integral of 4 sine x, which just gives me a plus 4 cosine x. How come? Well, the derivative of cosine is a negative sine, so that's why I have that. And don't forget your plus c. We're done with that one. All right, I do want to do one more. If you want to pause this video and try it on your own and then restart it and see if you get the right answer, I think that's a nice idea. If you want to watch me do this one, just follow along. Here I've got f of x is going to be equal to x. The reason why is when I take the derivative of it, I get 1. And if I were to keep taking the derivative of it, I do get 0. Now my g prime of x is going to be e to the x, and that makes total sense. Remember, that's going to be the one that should be easy to take the integral of. All right, now plugging into this formula, I need to do f of x times g of x, in which case that's going to be x times whatever this is. Well, what's the integral of e to the x? That's just e to the x, and again, you can check that by saying, what's the derivative of this? Yes, I get that. So going back to this, I need to do f of x, which is x times g of x. So that's going to be x times e to the x. Now I put my minus, and then I've got my integral of my f prime of x, which is 1, and then my g of x, which is e to the x. If you want to put your dx, that'd be great. Drop this down, x times e to the x, and then what's the integral of 1 e to the x? Well, that's just e to the x. So I'm just going to have that, and then don't forget your plus c. Thanks for watching.